Did you have Mrs. Niles? Did you know Mrs. Niles? Yeah.
Yes. Her niece is a student teacher across from me where she's right now.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, she was my 6th grade English teacher, and she
So
was
you
like,
went to Sedgwick.
oh yeah, oh, it's like a black hole. It sucks you back in.
It does.
I'm working on getting out.
Are you going?
But then I let my kids grow up, and so I was like, I want to keep them in Sedgwick, and I've been glad that I've kept them in Sedgwick, like I said, because like, you know,
Yeah.
when I saw the posting for the principal's job, I'm like, wait a minute, is he K6 or K8? And Adley, my daughter's like, K8, but you know, since she's in the other building, and it wasn't that as quite a big deal for her. I was like, but so he won't be there when you go to junior high? And she's like, no, we'll have a new principal for junior high. And I was like, but do you think he would stay for a couple more years just to get you through middle school? She loves Mr. B.
Good. So do I.
Kind of partial to him. All right. So,
Oh yeah, I'm Michael.
I don't know if I actually got to this slide. We were here, right? Because I talked about like different activities for, and the curriculum I couldn't think of last week is called layered curriculum. Not that it matters. But I totally thought of it as I was driving home. Anyway, so picking up where we left off, differentiated scaffolding. Again, we're still looking at the different kinds of strategies to help build their vocabulary. And I think of all the things that I've noticed in the lesson planning, that's probably the one area that is the weakest. I'm not saying it's weak by all means. It's just if there was anything that I could pick apart, it would just be make sure when you're addressing your vocabulary, you would address how to deal with L1 Ls, or Ls who have a bigger L1 vocabulary than their L2 vocabulary, right? The ones who need that. And I know you probably don't have a lot of them in your classes, but if you did, how would you address that? Okay. So moving on, I thought I had actually gotten to here, but when I figured out, I just let you guys go, and I was like, I'm going to cover that other slide. Anyway, syntax. A look at reading. Academic language. So shifting from vocabulary a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit about language and how to dissect complex sentences and complex ideas. If the students, you know, I think as teachers, if we don't think that the students have the language, we shy away from bigger ideas, more complex ideas, because we are afraid that they don't have enough in their little arsenal to get through it. And that's not necessarily the case. We need to figure out how much they have in their L1, what kind of vocabulary they already have, what kind of academic vocabulary that they have. So again, what is academic language? These are words used in content instruction. This is where it's going to be more specific to your content. So in elementary school, it's going to be more difficult because you've got a much more broad, because you're teaching everything. But when you get into high school and middle school, your content becomes more specific. We want to support each other. You know, I try and make sure that I'm utilizing vocabulary that I know they're going to utilize in other classes. I know freshmen are talking about democracy, which is a great, you know, we're going to talk about democracy again as seniors specifically. So that's language that we should be building on. Logical reasoning. They can do this. I'm questioned it today in some of my classes whether they had logical reasoning, but they are capable. Terms expressing relationship and time, very, very difficult because we don't all have the same concept of time. That's very difficult for them. Western civilization, Western society has a much different view on time and space. I know, especially with my Hispanic students at the beginning of this year, it really took me a lot of time to get used to proximity with them because they do not have this, right? They don't understand. This is my bubble. I felt like walking around with my hula hoop. This is my space. Don't come into my space. But they're just more comfortable with it. Things like this. Prepositions, very difficult for them. They don't know where to put them. And adjectives and adverbs. And I think going any direction with a language, like learning Spanish. It's hard, right? Because we all do it different. All right, reading a math problem. So how do you unpack a complex sentence? So the first part of this sentence, or the first part of this problem is pretty simple. Students in Mr. Jacobs' English class were given speeches. Okay. Each student's speech was 7 to 10 minutes long. All right. Which of the following is the best estimate for the total number of student speeches that could be given in an hour in a 2-hour class? And that's when you lose them because they become overwhelmed with all the information. So how do you break it down? Charts, graphic organizers,
So you
boxes.
underline and circle.
So underline everything that's time. Underline everything that's, give them specific instruction to mark the text. I think a lot of times when marking the text got really popular here, everyone felt like they had to strictly adhere to the underline the keywords, or underline the main idea, circle the keywords, number the paragraphs. You can only do these kinds, it doesn't matter how you have them marked, as long as you're explicit in your instructions, but whatever you're having them do, just, have them interact with the text. But yeah, I mean, that's what they've done here. It's, each thing that they have to do is a different color. If you know ahead of time, and you can do that, if you have access to a color printer, things like that, sometimes it's just a matter of going in ahead of them and highlighting something, or putting it on the document camera. We're going to highlight this together. Depends on how much time you have. Vocabulary is not taxing, so nothing in there is vocabulary for your basic learner, right? That's going to blow them away. They know all of these words. They know estimate. That's a word they've heard. It's a math term. I would say, if anything, that's going to be the most difficult vocabulary word. But the phrasing, and when we get into assessments next year, we'll talk a lot about phrasing, because the smartest kids, you can throw them off with a word, right? Except is always the one that catches them off guard. So do you mean this or do you mean this? Is this a true statement or a false statement? Okay. So you have a complex phrase with a prepositional phrase and a passive construction. So all of a sudden they're like, what is it asking me to do? So how do you unpack the text? Lucky for you, I got an example somewhere. So this is a text from, this is an excerpt from a text about the Civil War. Textbooks are notorious for having passive voice that the kids really struggle with understanding what it is exactly they're being asked to do, or what it is exactly is happening. So if you read the first paragraph, I'll give you just a minute, read through that.
But he went to Iceland and nothing, so he's probably.
Are we good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So
He just said hi to me.
I would have probably put the chart actually under the first paragraph if I were unpacking this. But the first paragraph is pretty basic. I mean, it's numbers. There's a lot of information in there, but the patterns are right. Subject, verb, subject, verb, subject, verb. They're not. There's nothing passive about the sentences. And then you just fill in the information. Number of states. It's very easy for them to go. There were 23 states. 11 states had population. So they're just filling in the information. Okay? Read the second paragraph, if you have not done so already.
What are modal auxiliaries?
What are what?
Modal auxiliaries.
Yeah.
It says passive voice.
Modal auxiliaries, relative clauses, comparatives, and logical connectors. Those are questions for an English teacher. I can actually look up modal
It's okay,
auxiliaries.
you don't have to.
What word it
seriously.
even is.
I'll continue not knowing it.
It hasn't hurt us yet.
But
That it hasn't hurt us yet. We cannot know.
exactly. When I go home, I have an Alexa, and it's seriously the most useful thing ever because I'm constantly asking about words.
Helping verbs.
So can they just say?
That's what a
helping
modal
verbs?
auxiliary is.
Helping verbs.
Why they don't just say helping verbs, right?
That I know.
So will, shall, may, might, right? Those are the
Mm-hmm.
as, am, are, as. Shall, will, may, might. Am, is, are, was, were, have, has, had, could, which is, shall, will, might. So those are your modal auxiliaries. Again, yeah, helping verbs.
Like would and could?
She shall go. Instead of just she goes, she shall go.
She shall go.
Did have.
Yeah, might have.
You get lots of this. We can do it.
Helping verbs are what you add as a high school student to make your paper longer.
Or in 5th grade, it's what they have to learn to know what they are and pick
Oh.
them out of a sentence.
Gotcha.
It's ridiculous because they're like, we don't even know what regular verbs are.
How are we going to know what helping verbs are? Okay, so this paragraph, much more complicated. What the South did have, however, was the advantage of fighting mostly on its own turf. So what did the South have? Well, they had an advantage. What was the advantage fighting on their own turf? So they're breaking down a sentence. Defending its own homeland. So this is a complex sentence already, right there. First sentence. And so what are the kids going to do? Shut down.
It's too much.
Yep, too much. Can't figure it out.
I read it like 3 times. And I'm not even an ELO.
In war, comma, it is generally an advantage to be the defender rather than the attacker. For one thing, the South's supply and communication lines would be shorter than that of the invading North. Are all those extra words needed? And right? And so all of a sudden you've taken a text that's relatively easy to read, and in the second paragraph, all of a sudden you've lost the kids. So your questions are going to become more leading. Who or what did the action? South. Okay, so South. What is the action? Well, that's a good question. The South had the advantage of fighting on its own turf. Well, I can already see some problems there. What word are they probably not going to know?
Turf.
Yeah. What's turf?
Or if they know it, it's going to be the football field or soccer
Yeah, it could
field.
be, yeah. And so, South supply and communication lines, what was the action?
Shorter.
Yeah, it was shorter than that of the invading North. Of that of the invading North. Could you not just say it's shorter than that? It's shorter than the North's? So, basically what they're telling you is pre-read. Pre-read what you're giving your students, especially if you've got L's. A lot of novels, a lot of things like this, they have, you can buy a version that is more user-friendly. But you have to be very careful and make sure that the kids know that they're different. This is someone's interpretation. I've read some of the different versions of, like Taming of the Shrew. I know that there's one that they use for the ELLs, for our ESOL classes, and it's just a little bit different. And it's different enough that I would say, if you didn't know the story well enough, you could get lost in it sometimes. because the language is not the same. I understand the original version well enough to say that some of the words that they replaced probably are not the way I would have replaced them. Does that make sense? I know using primary source documents, I try and, if I've rewritten something, like the preamble to the Constitution, okay, that's pretty heavy for them to get through. I try to have somebody else read them. Does this sound similar? Like, does this sound like the same thing? Because I don't want my bias feeding into it. I don't want my interpretation, right, wrong, or otherwise. I don't want it to influence theirs. Major types of text. So, this is just kind of so you're aware, I guess. I think as teachers we know this, but yes. We should be wrapping up 10 today. Or whatever. Today is week 9, or week 10 of the PowerPoint, I guess.
No, because your PowerPoint is split in half.
Is that what you were looking at, was the PowerPoint? So were you looking at the instruction? Or the assignments?
Yeah, I'm taking PowerPoint.
Yeah, it's the second part of that last PowerPoint. Okay, so major types of school text. These are the kinds of text that most kids are going to run into. Relate or recount. This could be really in any class. Narratives and stories. It gives you an example. It gives you a purpose, organizational style, cohesive devices, and additional language features. So if you fall into one of these categories, it just gives you kind of a heads up of what to look for as you're preparing. We just started the DBQ last week, and my kids make me laugh sometimes. When we work with any kind of document, they're either going to mark the text or they're going to do a who, why, what, when, where. They may do more, but those are the two. They know that those are the two things. So when I gave them their DBQ, that's exactly what I had them do when they broke down the packet. And they were so funny. They're like, "Oh, Miss, we've been doing this all year." I'm like, "Oh, let them, right? You got it." We've been practicing this, and so they got through those documents super fast. If you know ahead of time what's coming, again, this is just good teaching, right? Good practice. I do know teachers who give their kids stuff that they've not read. Whatever, right? They find, and I know sometimes you're like, "Oh, this looks like a great article," so you read the first paragraph. This is exactly what I want to, and so you give it the assignment to the kids, and the kids will ask questions about it, and you look like an idiot because you can't answer the questions, right? Because you didn't finish the document. So, I guess my piece of advice to all new teachers: actually read whatever it is that you're giving them. We got time. How to break down. This is crazy. These are kindergartners, and they are learning about butterflies. Listen to the words these kids are using. It's. I don't think I could even get my high school kids to use this. Now, there's like 5 teachers in this classroom, and they're all sort of got a job. So we don't have that.
Oh, right, these are not the wings, and what if they fly, right? That's very good. Very good observation. Learning like scientists. Very good.
Let's today continue our study of the metamorphosis of the butterfly.
Metamorphosis.
Okay.
They use the word.
All right, boys and girls, now I'm going to tell you how there's something you learn about butterflies. So you'll talk.
This is why I can be an elementary school teacher. I need to take
Excellent answers. So let's share them together. Okay. Monkey.
Butterflies pop their wings.
Butterflies pump their wings. Do you know why?
So that we could die.
So they could dry. Good.
Alani,
Butterflies have long velocity.
what's proboscis for?
Right? I had to Google it.
Right, long
It's there.
proboscis, drink the
And
neck.
just like
Yeah.
your water nose kind of
Very
thing.
good. Lots of hands. Good. Bo. And then Brian. Bo.
Once they start looking at them for the flower, then the chrysalis not coming out. Then the water's coming out now. And they're about to do a good Andrew.
Okay, so you have a lot of information there, saying a lot of things. You started by saying they get nectar, they get from the flower, right? Then there's a chrysalis, and something happens inside of that chrysalis, right? We're going to look at the sentence we looked at yesterday. And look at your sentences, and look at the big sentence. And it happens that this lady, Irene Kelly, who wrote this book, it's A Butterfly's Life, which is great. She was excited too about butterflies. She wrote a book. And this is her sentence that we looked at yesterday. So let's look at her sentence and yours. Look at the next part. And wait.
Right now, get trust me, okay? We're gonna get to know some
Put
class.
it together.
The most awe-inspiring event in a
Butterfly's life is its metamorphosis as it transforms from egg to caterpillar to chrysalis.
Very good. And transforms.
Why do you put that?
That's a very important word.
It's just an accident.
So let's look at your sentences too, okay?
So boys and girls, these are ideas we got from you yesterday.
Right?
Whoa.
Which has to do with a transformation, a big change, an important change, right?
All right.
All
Let's do this together, all right?
Butterfly lay eggs on a little leaf.
That's in
The Zingies, thank you.
The caterpillar had to come the egg.
Right?
Inside the chrysalis, the caterpillar turns into a pupa. The chrysalis is the cover to protect the pupa.
Jackie, thank you.
Those sentences are about the metamorphosis.
What about the butterfly?
There's also one sentence down here, metamorphosis too.
Read that one.
The butterfly.
We're going to talk
We're gonna talk
about
about later.
these sentences are about the next part of the sentence that we looked at. And this is we really picked our longest sentence, boys and girls. We didn't even realize how long it was when I read it. We were like, wow, this is like amazing that we have such a long sentence. I know. Let's see if we can get it. Let's look at the last part of this. This is really long. Whoa. You can even count the words for this one. Let's look at that last part. Emerging as a creature of delicacy and grace. And we spoke about delicacy and grace. We spoke about something beautiful that has lightness and grace. And some people, you mentioned some things. Let's look at what you said. You said,
Bonnie said.
The butterfly is beautiful like a flower.
so a flower has delicacy and grace. And I thought of something, but let's read the next one that you thought of.
Okay, so we can all agree that the words in the story are not kindergarten level words.
That'd be real, like fifth graders gonna do that.
Okay, and they're very. I like the fact that the kids are kind of disheveled because usually when you see videos, the kids are like little robots, and you're like, where do you find kids like that? You know?
What did you
Yeah.
threaten that you were
Exactly.
taking away?
So these guys are kind of squirrely. That's what I like about this. So they're talking over each other, but there's two teachers, and it doesn't look like it's a very big class. And then in one of the scenes, if you look back, there's like 2 more people in the back. I don't know how many of them were there for the recording part of it, but so they took one sentence, they had the students write sentences about the other sentence, they used their own words. So there's tons of activities that you can do. I know that we don't have time to break down every sentence, but if you do come across something that you feel is really, really big and overwhelming for them, you know, there's lots of really good strategies to help you break it down so that they are, you know, different ways for them to use those words over and over again. Because, I mean, how many times do they use words metamorphosis and transforming? Metamorphosis is a hard word just to say, and then to actually understand what it means. I forgot to look and see. I have the 5th edition. So if you have the 4th edition, the pages are correct. I did not look to see what pages they were in the new book. So this is all research-based. This is coming from your SciOp book. Certain L1 skills and abilities transferred to English literacy. Phonemic awareness. Those are, you know, your cognates, things like that. They already have a recognition of the word because they know the word, or they recognize part of the word. Comprehension and language learning strategies, L1 and L2 oral language, oral knowledge. They've heard it. They may not have seen it. You know, if you come across words like that, I'm sure, where you're like, I did not know that's how that word was spelled. Or you see it spelled, you're like, I didn't know that's how it was pronounced. I was like 14 or 15 years old, and I was making my prom dress, and the word bodice, right? And I went in to say something to my mom, and I said, I don't know how to put the zipper in the bodice. And my mom's like, the what? The bodice. She's like, I don't know what that is. So I bring my little instructions. She's like, that's bodice. I'm like, it says bodice, but whatever. You know, I thought I was doing pretty good. Little words like that. Pedophore. I don't know how many times I saw the word pedophore written out, and I always said petite four. I did not realize that it was the same word. Okay? So they have that awareness of a lot of the words that we say, but when you spell it or you put it in writing, sometimes they lose that. Okay? Teaching the 5 major components of reading to L's is necessary but not sufficient for developing the academic literacy. They need the oral language as well. High quality instruction is similar to high quality instructions for everybody. But they need the accommodations and the support to fully get the English part of it. And then explicit vocabulary development. Based on my work with English learners, I can see how this. So this is one of those moments where we would stop if we had time. List group label. I do this a lot of times with bigger concepts, like when we're getting ready to start a unit, so Civil War or Reconstruction, or usually it's a pretty limited list because they haven't learned about it yet, but you know, as they get older, especially with your juniors and seniors, they've got a little bit more experience or exposure to stuff. So when you give them something that they're reading, you have them, right, this is a before reading activity. They're making predictions, basically. You just have them brainstorm the topic. Obviously, the more exposure the topics had, the more information they're going to have. Like when movies come out about certain things, then all of a sudden kids know everything about it. I did notice that, strangely enough, I had a bunch of teenage boys who really knew a lot of stuff about World War II. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out where it was because they were playing video games. The war game, yeah.
Call of Duty.
The Call of Duty apparently is pretty historically correct on some of their stuff. And they're like, oh yeah, I know that. I mean, they like geographic, their mapping skills, because the maps are realistic. Some of the technology that they talk about, because they'll get into arguments, that wasn't developed until later because that came in this edition of Call of Duty or whatever. Whatever. I'm not going to fight you on it. But, you know, that they do have some prior knowledge. With movies, you know, lots of movies, you have to be careful with the content, make sure that it's accurate. But they are exposed to a lot more stuff. I did not know anything about Vietnam when I was in school. You know, it wasn't something that we really covered. My dad was a Vietnam veteran. I should have had knowledge of Vietnam. So I think they're exposed to a lot more stuff. So the list group label. So they brainstorm, they make their list of whatever they know, and then you categorize those lists. So they're looking for similarities. And then they create, and really they look for the similarities and then they create the categories. I kind of like that too. Instead of creating the category first and trying to put everything into a list. After reading, you revisit the list, check terms for relevance and modifications. Reading Rockets and Adult Lit both are just going into more depth on this list group label strategy. So that's before. During reading, this is just basically one of the Cornell Notes or SQ3Rs or the SQ3RR, 3ST, whatever. They've added more letters to it. This is just the question part. Turning headings into questions and lists on the left side of the T-chart. If you do Cornell Notes in your class, it's already got the little column over there for questions. As they read the passages, do they answer the questions? Right answers on the right side of the T-chart. So we have a teacher that actually does it in this format, and the kids do really well. So your questions are on the left, and then you have a margin on your right to answer the questions. I was encouraging them to take notes down the center, so you have kind of a 3-column note. And then have them share out. When I taught freshmen, that was the first, we did a scavenger hunt and we went over all the different parts of a textbook. What's a heading? What's a subheading? Why are these words bolded? Why are these words italicized? Why does this text look different? I should probably do it with my upperclassmen too. Just having them identify, they're different for a reason, okay? When they have a chart.
We teach that.
Do
Yeah, no fiction text features.
yeah. I say teach it. I'm sure we're reviewing because most of them know it. But then we take that extra. Do you guys interact with them?
Yeah.
Like do the questions and that kind of stuff? I always tell them, how many of you guys like to just walk into a theater and tell the guy at the thing, give me whatever ticket you want. I'll watch whatever you want me to watch and just go watch a movie. Or do you get online, check the movies out, look at the ratings, not the ratings, like
The review.
but the reviews. Or when you read a book, how many of you just pick up a book and start reading? Not me. I read the back. I'll probably read the front. I might even read the last page before I start reading it because I want to have an idea. I know, I'm that person.
I only do that sometimes.
I want to know if I'm going to like this book before I commit to it, right? And so they need to know that that's what this is. They're giving themselves, they're prefacing, right? They're prefacing what they're going to read. The headings are purposefully done that way. And then have them share out. Yes, I know, people will freak out on me. I'll read the whole last chapter before I'll read the book.
If I have a hard time reading a book and I'm like third of the way through and I'm like, I'm not,
Where's
this
this
isn't
going?
I
Yeah.
do it.
I gotta know if the main character survives, really, that's the biggest part.
Or if you have somebody you
read
really
a book,
like.
you read a book, you take 100 minus your age, and if you get to that page and you still don't like it, that's when you give up on it.
100 minus your age. That
Yeah.
wouldn't get me very
That
far.
can be a page.
Well, if it takes, I mean, a lot of,
I know.
like, especially with kids, that's my big way. If you can get to this and you can tell me what's going on, then you quit that book. But a lot of them will get 5 seconds into the book and they're like,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I will exhaust myself on an author. And then when I'm done with that author, I will literally walk around a library or bookstore like a puppy, just I don't know what to do now. I need something new. And I don't really have a particular genre. I was geeking out on Ready Player One though. I read that 2 summers ago when they made a movie.
Really good.
The
So
book was
is
amazing.
nothing like the movie though. I haven't read the book.
Oh,
They
really?
said it's like my parent went and saw it and he read it because he was all pumped to go see
Nothing?
it. No.
Yeah, they said the.
He said it's not
isn't that
even
how
like-
it always is though. Movies always.
No, he said
terrible.
this one was like crazy different.
Different?
Like, he was like, what the heck? This stuff happened in here that never happened
No.
here. And
My sister's keeper always ruined for me.
I think that's how all of the movies are. Like, all the movies suck compared to the book.
Oh, yeah.
There's not a single movie that anybody can convince me of is better than the book. They're all-
No, but there are some that they do better. I remember I remember spending one whole Christmas break getting my hands on all of the stupid Twilight books.
Oh
Yeah.
dear God, that was a phase for me too. Yep, I did it.
And I remember I drug my son to see the first
I did
movie.
it.
in
You
the
drive your
theaters.
son?
Oh yeah.
Oh.
So we get through the movie, and I had to ask him, like, did you even understand what was going on? The movie was and there were so many holes. Not that the book is by any means any kind of literary merit, but it was. There are some books where you're just like, how do you even know what's going on? They've just kind of chunked out the most exciting parts, and there's no story. So those frustrate me. That bums me out about Ready Player One. I read his second book, was not as good. If anybody's wondering.
I didn't read the book, but I really liked the movie.
Well,
My
that's what
son
they
said it was amazing.
He said he would have liked the movie more if he hadn't.
Read
He
it?
finally had to tell himself, just enjoy
Let
the
it go.
movie. Let it go. It's not going to be the same, and it's okay.
Yeah. Oh, I did that too. We with my Tower Time kids, we watched and read The Maze Runner at the same time. So we'd read it and then we'd watch
Maze
it.
Runner books were great, and
Yeah.
the movies
Sucked.
Yeah.
And I did that on purpose because I knew that they weren't really. So we did a big comparison activity, like why are books and movies so different, and why do they do certain things. But it almost ruined the whole series for me. And then I read the last one. It's like the Divergent series too. The last book on that one, I was like,
Yep. Totally awful. So dumb.
Okay, guided reading procedures after reading. So this is after. So we've got the before, the during, the after. Always very important if you're giving them big texts to give them these strategies. Okay, the GRP, guided reading. I love this activity. I think it's really good for adults too. So you have them read it. You don't give them any. They've done their before. They've done their during. They've read their text. You have them flip that bad boy over, and on the back, they just list as many things, many facts, or as many whatever it is that you want them to remember. On their own first. I always have them do it on their own. And then have them share their. Okay? And then they go back and they reread and verify. Were you right? How close were you? For language learners, this is building they're strengthening their brain in this case. But it's like repetitions. You're how much can you remember? Because you're not only remembering facts, but in some cases you're remembering the actual language itself, the word. So you're like, I don't know what that word is.
Do you tell them beforehand that you're going to do this activity?
Yes. I mean, I give them, we're going to do an activity with her. I mean, not necessarily tell them what the activity is, but I will definitely tell them we're going to do, this is not it. We're going to do something else with the content. So read it carefully. And then sequential information. One of the tests, what is the maze or the RCB, it has to do with sequence, doesn't it? That they have to put things in a certain sequential order.
That was the maze. We don't do it anymore.
Don't do it
Well,
anymore.
in FastBridge, when you go to progress monitoring, you can do a sequence.
A sequence. That's sometimes more difficult because they're so worried about the content that they're like, so there was a dog, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, but, well, what order did it happen in? And so that's just another step. And then identify the main point of the passage in one sentence. So this is really something simple. This is a great strategy that you can just kind of get them in the habit of doing. After a while, they'll catch on that they're going to do it, so they're going to be a little bit more careful with their facts. But relevance wheel, also another easy one. I like doing it on the dry erase boards. Write an event in the center. So whatever it is that you're talking about, it could be a big concept or a little concept. It could be a book. It could be a math problem. It could be, we could talk about an individual in history. Write outcomes of the event on the spokes of the wheel, or whatever it is that you're doing. Facts about that person. And then reflect on how the event can have an effect now, or your connection to the event. Write this on the outside. So you've got your content, right? You're doing your application piece. What do you know? And then you're making the connections. And you can play with it and do whatever you want, but it's just a great visual tool. I've also had teachers where they actually had them do pictures on the inside of the wheel, and then on the outside they make the connections, the word connections, or have the kids write out sentences. Round robin. So with your L's, if you've got a high population of L's, round robin oral reading is probably not the best choice. There's just so many things that we learn about. It's intimidating. The kids focus too much on what everyone else thinks. There's so much pressure for them to, it's okay if you want to do an activity where you tell them you're going to read this paragraph, give them the information ahead of time. Obviously reading aloud, having them read with you, have difficult passage to model problem solving with demanding text. So you can have you read, the students can read, and then you can dissect the text itself. Say something. This is a good strategy if you can get the kids to do it. Usually I can't ever get them to, right? I read, and then you say something, and then you read and I say something. I usually have to give them something very specific. Okay, partner A reads, partner B, you make a prediction. Prediction. If you give them just say something, they say whatever they want and they start talking about Ready Player One. Whatever. So, with the round robin again, coming back to that, I think there are ways to do it that it is not as intimidating. Because I think reading aloud is important. And if you have a small enough group of kids that are comfortable with it, but just keep in mind that just giving kids a text and having them read around in a circle, especially if you're putting them into small groups, they're not going to get a lot of information. More resources, informational text, build knowledge through the text and text complexity, more building on the strategies we've looked at. Resources on teaching, this one, got a second. This is a closed reading activity that I thought was pretty cool.
Cambridge, would you mind reading our first learning target today?
I can get the gist and determine the main idea in a newspaper article.
The text I chose for today's class was an article from the Buffalo News about a Seneca school called Faith Keepers that teaches a lot about Seneca language and culture. Look at some of the important words in there. What's an important word in this learning target? Go ahead, Julia.
Seneca.
This Seneca. Right now the fifth graders are studying the idea of culture through various case studies. Mainly they're focusing in on indigenous Native American peoples of Western New York. What's another important word that we're looking at, Mr. Sapa?
Main idea.
Main idea. What is that big idea that's really important to the author? In an assessment that I've given my students recently, I would notice that they weren't picking out really important details, especially as they relate to the main idea.
Yep.
So this lesson was really designed to help kids to see the connection between important details and main idea. What's another important word that we're looking at? Christian.
Gist.
Gist. What is the gist? If I'm asking you to jot the gist in the margin, what are you writing about?
The important parts of the story or article.
Yeah, or what it's about, right? Today we're going to be starting a close read of a brand new text. I want you to think about all the close reading we've done before. We do a close reading process in my classroom, and it's often a multi-day process. And the first time kids read, they're reading just to get the flow of the text from the beginning to the end. And this is sort of a low-stakes moment in reading. I want you
This freaks kids out. You want me to read it 3 times?
All right, show some perseverance. The second time they go back to the text, they're annotating it in several different ways in order to help them understand it. Circling important words and jotting the gist in the margins. If you're having a hard time, if this text feels really difficult to you, what is something you can do as a reader to help you to get through it and to make it a little more manageable?
Get the gist in baby steps.
Get the gist in baby steps.
So when we first started the whole marking the text strategy here, there was a battle because some of us really wanted them to use the word annotate, since we're having them do annotated bibliographies, so that because you have the kids do something, you're like, can you annotate it? Or I want you to annotate this text, or I want you to annotate the, I've done for different vocabulary activities or whatever, we do one-pagers, draw a picture of this and then annotate it, and they're like, what does that mean? And so I like the fact that he uses the word annotate in here too. But again, he's spending a lot of time on what to do. They're not even in the text yet. They're still breaking down. He's going over again. So being very, very explicit with your L's is, well, all of our students, obviously, but so very, very important. And again, with the DBQ, I passed out the DBQ. I spent like 15 minutes going over the instructions. I walked around. I made sure if there was no questions, and they were, boom, they were right. They were marking the text, and they were, they already knew what they were supposed to do. So practicing those strategies, it gets redundant. I know it's hard because you feel like I want to change it up or do something new, but keep your standard 3 or 4 strategies that you really like. You can add new stuff in all the time, but giving them that base, then they're not learning the strategy on top of it. Okay. Other great resources, that one I just really liked because I felt like it built on what we were doing. So both content and language. What am I doing here? Oh, this is an activity. Sorry, we're not doing the activity. Unless you guys want to. No. Okay. So, so RTI and special education. So one of the discussion board prompts kind of dealt directly with this. Language and phenome differences between languages. Okay, so I didn't double check this. I think this is still from from the 4th edition. So your pages might be a little off. So RTI, response intervention. Sorry. Response. We just went over it in one of the. We had a meeting with special ed. So response to intervention. Project monitoring goes back to this too. Going back and looking, are they making progress? Using research-based strategies. Are all the teachers using the same strategy or similar strategies? L's and SPED, is the percent of L's and SPED programs equal to L? At North, if you get into high school, they don't test.
Well, I said it just depends on your school, because
Yeah.
like ours, or at least in my, even classrooms, because our classrooms are totally different. We talked about that on our way in, like my SPED, I have 4 IEPs in my classroom, and 3 of them are also ESOL.
ESOL. I think there's and I teach ESOL classes. Kids that are dual, that are both SPED and ESOL is very low.
Yeah, I said I think it probably depends on age and where you're at. Because like if you
Yeah.
go to College Hill, they're not going to have any ESOLs in their SPED, so
Right.
then it's going to be
Exactly.
totally different.
Do you guys at North see that? Do you feel like you have a lot of SPED and ESOL kids?
I think there's more than what I thought there was, because I started going through my list and I was
Yeah.
like, huh. Because like that number's got to be way low, because you talk to anybody in either one of those departments and you bring up the other one, they're like, ooh, no, I'm good.
Yeah, yeah.
You bring up, you
Ooh,
take
stay away. Ooh,
an
yeah.
an L to the SPED department, they're like,
They already get services, right? That's
Right,
usually
yeah.
the biggest problem. They're already receiving services.
Oh dang, that's crazy. In elementary, like mine qualify for both, but their special ed services take place before their ESOL services,
Right.
Because we can hit their ESOL services in their SPED.
And they are required by law to have so many minutes, and so we don't have that. The minutes thing is based on whoever your lead is. We'll make the decision and conversations. It's a lot more fluid. So yeah, language learners versus language learners with disabilities. It's hard too, because the definition of someone who has a learning disability is that they're a certain level below. So if they're in 8th grade and they read at a 6th or 5th grade level, that could be because of a learning disability. It could be because they haven't been in school for 2 years. And when we get into high school, we see a lot more of that, because we have kids who just aren't in school. They're moving around a lot. They disappear from our, they just
They
don't
go
come
to Mexico.
Yeah, they go to Mexico and they're not in school there. I've got a kid right now, he's 17. He has no credits. Everything he has is what we've given him. He's been here and he left and he's come back, but he's not moved into any regular ed classes. All of his classes are ESOL, and those are just electives.
It's funny though, like the kids that are in and out of placement have the same problem.
Yeah.
Like I don't.
And I know they I know there's school in, especially like JDF and those kinds of places, they're getting classes, but I don't know where their transcripts are.
Well, but if they're moving, so I had a kid 2 weeks ago. He dropped off my list because he got locked up, and then pops back on my list. Well, he just missed 2 weeks worth of class. So now, like, what are we supposed to do with all of these numbers?
Yep.
And the counselor's like, and they have to spend 4 days in orientation at JDS, so they don't even get to go in their first week. So they just spend a whole entire week not in school. So I know that it's all around.
Yeah. We have a lot of issues that are not being addressed.
So many.
Okay. That brings us to what is today?
Today's the ninth.
4/9.
No class next week.
No class next week.
Senior projects.
Yep. And so, yeah.
Great
So
Saturday.
next week on the
Saturday, Monday.
right.
23rd.
So on the 23rd and the 30th, we'll finish up. I guess we still do have one more unit, don't we?
We have one more discussion.
One more discussion board and one more unit of,
And one more lesson, right? We have lesson 4.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's due on the
I
23rd.
already did it.
Lesson 4 is due on the 23rd.
Yeah. And the discussion board's due on the 23rd.
Yeah.
And then we don't have anything until the 7th, which is the last discussion board, history of methods and current practices, and we begin presentations. So we'll begin presentations on the 7th, we'll wrap them up on the 14th, when you'll have the assignment, the final, and the survey will be open to you.
So we have 2 more discussion boards?
Yes. One on the 23rd and one on the 7th.
What's the 23rd one about?
What is the 23rd?
Yeah.
Support for families and Ls with special needs. Respond to prompt 1. Oh, respond to prompt 1 original post in response to another student post.
Okay.
I thought that was the
Was
one we
that
just did.
today?
Yeah, I was like, I think that's what we just did, but it didn't say to respond to somebody else, did it?
No,
Yeah.
it didn't. Oh,
No,
I-
I
It
didn't
just
see
says it
that.
in
On
here.
the syllabus,
say,
but not
okay.
on the
Yeah.
discussion board.
I can't adjust those discussion boards. Those are already pre-done. So you guys have already done that. Some of you have already done the discussion board. Because it's
We
not
need
due
to
until the
respond to
23rd.
somebody.
Yes. Was there another discussion? Is that it? That's it.
So just one, and that's
So you had
about
the
our lessons.
Myth number 5, the support for families and Ls with special needs. So it's basically talking about that special kids with disabilities. How are they being serviced? And then the last one is history of methods and current practices. And then presentations. Yeah. So we'll start presentations on the 7th.
Yeah, see, there's like a tennis meet going on out there.
Do you see tennis players?
For sure. Look how full it is.
We have a track meet going on.
Track meet, there you
Yeah, we
go.
have a track meet going on right
Okay,
now.
I walked by and there were tennis, and I
This
was
is a
like,
JV one.
I don't know what it is.
it was crazy pants
Church
busy.
sent out an announcement thing.
Oh yeah, because he needed announcers.